Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Orphie, an adorable sub DPS that uses off-field EX special attacks while providing decent buffs that enable big BP damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, engines, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information that will be shown is from the creator experience server, so things can still change when her banner drops. Let's first look at her main resource, Bottled Heat, which is indicated by the bar underneath her name. It has a max of 125 points, but at the start of combat, you get 100 right off the bat. With her chain attack, ult, and 3 of her special attacks giving 20 every time you use them, and it is required to use her big laser beam EX special. But speaking of which, let's discuss her various special attacks since they are her main damage source, starting with her off-field special attacks, which she has 2 of. These 2 attacks are triggered whenever you attack an enemy with characters other than Orphie, while also restoring 20 bottled heat every time they are triggered, but they do have a few differences. Her first one, Corrosive Flash, is only a regular special attack that does less damage but doesn't cost energy to use and has a cooldown of 5 seconds. While her second one is an EX special attack called Crimson Vortex that requires Orphie to have 60 energy but only consumes 30 energy when used. But it is very important to note that these 2 skills share the exact same cooldown timer of 5 seconds thanks to this part of her core passive. Meaning, if you trigger any one of her off-field attacks, you'll have to wait 5 seconds until you can use either the special or EX special variation again. But moving on, she also has 2 more EX special attacks, but they can only be used while Orphie is on field. Her first one, EX Special Watcher Step, consumes 30 energy while restoring 20 bottled heat. Now this attack does deal less damage than her off-field EX special, but it deals more days and it doesn't have the 5-second cooldown, which allows you to use it more often. And it might be beneficial to do so every now and then to help her get her big laser attack faster to help keep uptime on her buff. But speaking of which, her last on-field special, Heat Charge, requires and consumes 100 bottled heat to use, which has Magus and Orphie start firing a laser, with it ending with a spinning attack finisher. Now this laser has 2 modes. It starts off with a low firepower mode that reduces her damage taken by 40% while increasing her interrupt resist. And after firing for a while, this laser goes into high firepower mode, which greatly increases its damage and interrupt level while making Orphie completely immune to attacks. If Orphie is hit anytime during this attack, she automatically parries and her laser immediately goes into the high firepower mode. So it's very beneficial you time this to enemy attacks to maximize its damage. It's also important to note that this attack triggers a quick assist right as you activate it, making it easily quick swappable while giving more field time for your DPS to deal damage. Moving on to her ult, aside from making Orphie look really adorable, it's her fairly standard high damage ult that restores 20 bottled heat. However, it can also trigger a quick assist right as you activate it, and if you do, it extends its duration allowing for more damage, so you always want to quick assist out of Orphie right after activating her ult. This makes Orphie one of the only characters in the game with a quick swappable ult, which of course is neat for giving your DPS more field time for high damage rotations. But now moving on to her core passive, first of all, it gives Orphie a 25% crit rate buff alongside an 85% damage increase for her aftershocks. But speaking of which, her core passive makes it so that all of her attacks aside from her dodge counter is considered as an aftershock. Aside from this, when her EX special Heat Charge, which is her big laser, hits an enemy, it gives the entire party the Zeroed In buff. Zeroed In gives a base 280 attack buff, but for every 0.1 initial energy Orphie has above 1.6, her buff increases by 20 for a maximum buff of 700 attack. You'll need 3.7 initial energy regen in order to get her full attack buff, which does require her signature or a 60% energy regen engine. Just note, in battle energy regen buffs don't count towards this buff. It's also worth noting that this buff only lasts for 12 seconds, but it has a refreshable duration, and whenever an agent triggers an aftershock, its duration will get extended for 4 seconds up to a maximum of 32 seconds. And it's very important that I reiterate, this duration extension is only for the unit that triggers an aftershock, meaning it's perfect for aftershock units like Sandy or Trigger, while introducing some uptime issues for non-aftershock units due to the cooldown of her off-field attacks limiting bottled heat generation. As for her additional ability, it needs a stun or support unit to activate, and it allows the aftershocks of units with zeroed in to ignore 25% of the enemy's defense, which of course is perfect for boosting the damage output of Orphie and aftershock units like Sandy or Trigger. But with her kit out of the way, let's talk about her Mindscapes. Her M1 allows all of her special attacks to ignore 15 fire res, while enabling zeroed in to now give a 25% damage buff to the units that have it. Aside from more Orphie damage, this Mindscape improves her supportive utility, allowing non-aftershock units to benefit much more from her. While her M2 enables any of Orphie's attacks to restore 60 decibels with a cooldown of 4 seconds, and allows her ult to give her a personal 20% attack buff every time it's used. This Mindscape can enable you to use your ult much earlier in combat, while potentially allowing for an extra ult in deadly assault stages. If you only consider her off-field attacks with their shared cooldown of 5 seconds, she can get about 2,160 extra decibels with this Mindscape in 3-minute long stages. As for her M2, it increases zeroed in's initial duration to 16 seconds, while increasing the damage of her ult and EX special heat charge by 40%. Now the damage buff is pretty nice, but zeroed in's initial duration increase is way more important. It allows for a much higher uptime of her buff for non-aftershock units, allowing for more consistent damage. And finally, for her M6, allows the Fire Blade portion of her basic attack to restore 10 bottled heat, and trigger her EX Special Crimson Vortex by pressing the EX Special button right after it. It also increases the interrupt level of her laser attack, which is EX Special Heat Charge. And whenever said laser or ult hits an enemy, it deals additional damage equal to 250% of Orphie's attack, which can trigger every 0.5 seconds, and is considered as both an EX Special and Aftershock. And with her Mindscapes out of the way, let's talk about her possible Wenjins. Orphie's signature Bellicose Blaze has a 60% energy regen main stat, while giving her a bonus 20% crit rate just by equipping it, putting her at 50% crit rate without drive discs or substats. But aside from this, every time her fire aftershocks hits an enemy, it gives her a 15% def ignore for 8 seconds, and it can stack once every 3 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. And the neat thing is, it also has a refreshable duration, so it's pretty much permanent. In total, this Wenjin gives a 30% def ignore, which stacks nicely with a 25% from her additional ability, giving her a total of a 55% def ignore. It's also worth noting that this Wenjin is only one of few ways to reach 3.7 initial energy regen to get her full attack buff. But a really good alternative is Heartstring Nocturne for its insane crit value, making Orphie significantly easier to build, with it putting her at 54% crit rate without drive discs or substats. Plus, Orphie can somewhat benefit from its Fire Res Ignore for chain attack and ults to boost her damage a bit. Another great option is Severed Innocence, with it giving her up to a 108% crit damage at full stacks, which of course allows you to fully focus on other substats like crit rate or attack. It's also worth noting that Orphie can fully stack this Wenjin's passive as long as you use one basic attack with her every 30 seconds. But sadly, its 20% electric damage buff is useless for her. As for Brimstone, well, she can use it for its 30% attack main stat and high base attack, but sadly that's all you're really getting from this Wenjin since you cannot stack its passive buffs. It can still work as an attack stat stick, but I highly recommend giving it to another agent that can take more advantage of its effects. Now moving on to 4-star options, she has 4. A good free-to-play option is Marcato Desire simply because it gives 20% crit rate with its main stat. But sadly, you'll most likely only get 9.6% attack from its effects, since triggering anomalies in teams other than Mono Fire is pretty rare. But if you don't have it, Starlight Knight is also pretty good for a 44.2% attack buff, and she can easily trigger its passive due to her triggering quick assist with her ult and laser beam attack. Gilded Blossom is another fantastic free-to-play alternative that gives 34.6 attack and a 24% EX special damage buff just by equipping it, which of course she greatly benefits from since her main damage source is EX specials. And lastly, Cannon Rotor is also pretty decent for bonus crit rate and a bit of bonus attack. However, it is paid and it takes a while to get copies of. Now, you can also use other Wenjins that give energy regen with its main stat like the Drill Rig or Yuzuha Signature. They're able to help you get more out of her attack buff while helping her get energy at the same or similar rate to her signature. However, it's worth noting that for an extra 140 to 180 attack from her buff, you'll end up using a Wenjin with a useless passive for her, which can severely hurt her damage output depending on your team. And it's very important to state that triggering her off-field EX special more often will not help you get her laser attack faster for better buff uptime. Because again, it shares the same 5-second cooldown timer with her regular off-field attack, and they both restore 20 bottled heat. So in reality, with these Wenjins, you'll use more of her off-field EX specials and less of her regular off-field attacks, which is decent for consistent damage output, but it still results in the same rate of bottled heat generation. But with possible Wenjins out of the way, let's talk about drive discs. For the 4-piece set, her best stat is Shadow Harmony for its 15% aftershock damage buff and up to a 12% attack and crit rate buff just by triggering aftershocks 3 times. Which of course is pretty much permanent due to her triggering aftershocks at least once every 5 seconds. This set is pretty much the only set you should consider if you're focused on her damage output, since she is an aftershock attacker and it also makes her way easier to build. However, if you want a more supportive Orphie, Astral Voice can work if you're running her with Astral Yao. This is due to Astral Yao now using the Moonlight Lullaby set. So by giving Orphie Astral Voice, you can still get his full buffs by taking advantage of Astral Yao's quick assist mechanic. As for the 2-piece set, she has 2 options, either Swing Jazz or Moonlight Lullaby. Either one works since they both give 20% energy regen, so just use whichever has the best substats. But if you're wondering if you can use other sets, well, not really. These are pretty much required for her to not only provide a bigger attack buff, but to also consistently use her off-field EX special more often. But with her possible drive discs out of the way, let's talk about stats. For main stats, you want ER for slot 6, fire attack for slot 5, and finally crit rate or damage for slot 4. Now for the slot 4 main stat, it depends on your setup. He already has 42% crit rate with her kit and the Shadow Harmony set. So if you're running a Wenjin with crit rate like her signature, it's much more beneficial to run a crit damage main stat since you won't need as much crit rate from her substats. But if your Wenjin doesn't have crit rate, a crit rate main stat is pretty good, putting her at 66% crit rate, which allows you to focus on other stats instead. While for slot 6, ER is pretty much required, especially if you want to get her full buff if you roll for her signature. And aside from this, it also allows her to use her EX special more often. As for the slot 5 main stat, fire damage is pretty good for general use, but she already gets quite a bit of damage percent buffs from her kit, the Shadow Harmony set, and if you run her with Astral Yao. So attack percent is also pretty viable in teams where you're not running her with another attack buffer. Because in that case, attack will be the less diluted stat due to you not running an attack percent slot 6 and only getting bonus attack from Orphie herself. As for substats, you mainly want to focus on crit first, then attack percent, and finally flat penner attack. Fairly standard for non-anomaly DPSs. Now like I said, she already gets quite a bit of crit rate from her kit and other sources, so depending on your setup, the priority of crit rate substats can get lower. So with that in mind, I recommend you try to get as close to 100% crit rate as possible, with 75% to 80% being a good minimum goal. As for crit damage, you can try to go for 125% to 150% out of battle as a minimum goal to have her deal a lot of damage, but of course, you can always get more. And for attack, due to her running an ER slot 6, you can expect a lower attack stat out of battle. So with that in mind, if you're running a non-attack percent Wenjin, you can go for 2100 to 2250 attack out of battle. But if you're running an attack Wenjin like Starlight Knight, try to get around 2500. Now of course, more is better, but she already gives herself up to 700 attack, so only invest in some more if you've already balanced their crit ratio. And lastly, she does need 3.7 initial energy regen to get her full buff. This has to be out of battle ER for it to count, so in battle bonuses from Wenjins like Torrents don't count. So here's the amount of ER Orphie will have depending on your equipped Wenjin with an ER slot 6 and 2-piece set, alongside how much attacker buff will end up giving per setup. And as you can see, she can go from giving up to 700 attack with her signature all the way down to 520 attack without an ER Wenjin. With her stats out of the way, let's talk about possible teammates. Well, one of her best teammates right now is an on-field main DPS seed. Orphie's ability to use energy to trigger her EX special while off-field provides Seed with Steel Charge, while giving more field time for Seed to focus on dealing damage and generating even more Steel Charge for herself. This enables you to use her punch significantly more often, and when combined with Orphie's high off-field damage, it leads to a significantly higher overall damage output. Now sadly, there are some notable issues. First of all, due to Seed's buffs only affecting the active unit, they don't apply to Orphie while proccing her off-field aftershocks. But on the bright side, Seed should still be able to buff Orphie's big laser attack and ult, since you'd have to switch into her to use those. As for the second issue, it has to do with Orphie's buff uptime. Due to Seed not having aftershocks, Orphie's buffs only last for 12 seconds, and due to the cooldown of Orphie's off-field attacks, it results in some downtime for the buff. So if you're not careful when you use Orphie's laser attack, it can lead to Seed not having her buff during big damage instances, which of course isn't too ideal. However, the good thing is, this issue is less felt with Seed compared to other units due to her already big attack buff. And Seed has a really fun way of getting around this issue. Due to her giving Orphie 2 energy every second while she's dealing damage, it causes Orphie to get more energy than she actually needs. This enables you to switch into her every now and then and use her on-field DX special to generate bottled heat to help you get her big laser more often to improve her buff's uptime. But moving on to teams, you can pair them together with any support or off-field stunner you may have, with Trigger or Astra Yao of course being the best choice. However, from testing, any of their team variations is reliably able to clear endgame content, achieving high scores in Deadly Assault and quick runs in Shield Defense. The best Seed plus Orphie team I tried, however, was one with Trigger, achieving a whopping 48k score in Deadly Assault against the unknown Corruption Complex boss. But any of the other teams I tried was able to achieve at least around 40k no problem. But it's worth noting that the boss does have electric weaknesses with buffs that give bonus crit damage, electric damage, and universal damage buffs. Which explains why the Seed plus Trigger team performs so well despite being ran at M0R1. It's cause the stage buffs combined with Orphie's Aftershock Def Ignore and Trigger's signature essentially turned Trigger into a pseudo Sub DPS. And if you're curious on how much better Seed performed with Orphie, there was a 15.39% difference in terms of Deadly Assault score when comparing her old best team against the same boss with the exact same buffs. So Orphie is definitely a big upgrade for Seed. But moving on, the other best unit Orphie is best paired with is Soldier Zero Anbi, with Sanbi being able to fully take advantage of Orphie's 25% Aftershock Def Ignore buff. This is all on top of Orphie giving Sanbi so much field time to deal damage and build her Silver Star meter, while being able to deal good damage of her own while off-field. But most important of all is that thanks to Anbi being an Aftershock unit, she can easily get the full 32-second duration of Orphie's zeroed-in buff. Meaning, unlike other units, Anbi doesn't suffer from Orphie's buff uptime issues because you can easily get Orphie's laser back before the 32-second durations are up to refresh her buff. Now for teams, you can pair them together with off-field stunners like Yufufu, Trigger, or Pokra for a full Aftershock team, or simply pair them with a support like Astra Yao for more buffs. Out of all the teams I tried, the comp with Trigger or Astra performed the best, being able to achieve 44k and 43k runs respectively. Again, this is against the unknown Corruption Complex boss, which is why the comp with Trigger performed much better. But any of these teams can clear content just fine, though it's worth noting that compared to Seed, it was much harder to get high scores with Anbi. Not the best Orphie plus Anbi team compared to Anbi's previous team managed to perform 8.25% better, which is a big upgrade, but not too big to make Orphie a must-pull for Anbi. Now she can also be used with other on-field agents like Evelyn, S11, and Ellen. She gives them field time that they really need, while being able to deal good damage of her own, increasing the team's overall damage output. However, as I said, there is an uptime issue with her zeroed-in buffs, and that issue is more felt with these units, especially if you don't run another buffer. Depending on how much bottled heat you had when you used their laser, you can expect an 8 to 10 second downtime after her buff expires until her laser becomes available again to refresh her buff. All due to the cooldown of her aftershocks, but this isn't accounting for external factors like player error, which can extend the buff's downtime. Of course, this isn't too ideal since a big chunk of an on-field DPS's damage is dealt throughout their entire time in the field while building their resources. So they want buffs active a majority of the time while they're on-field. And if you're not careful on when you use Orphie's laser attacks, there will be times when these units will not have Orphie's buffs during their big damage instances, like one of Evelyn's chain attacks, leading to an inconsistent damage output. But there are some things you can do to mitigate this issue. First, if you know there's a big damage instance like a stun coming up, there's always the option of saving her laser until right before said instance to ensure her buff is up during the most important moments. And second, you can switch into her periodically to use her on-field EX special to generate bottled heat to get her big laser more often to improve her buff uptime. However, just note, unlike in seed teams, Orphie does not generate as much energy in these comps, so if you do this often, it can hurt her damage output by causing her to trigger less off-field EX specials. But with that in mind, you can run Ellen plus Orphie with any support or stunner of your choice, with Astra Yao or an off-field stunner like Trigger being the best. While you can run S11 or Evelyn with a third fire unit like Lighter, Lucy, or Yofufu for a mono fire team, which is particularly strong for fire weak content, but non-fire supports or stunners also work just fine. Out of all the fire teams I tried, the Orphie plus Astra and Evelyn team were the best, scoring a 36k in the notorious Pom-Pom boss, while the other teams were able to score pretty decently despite my skill issue with this particular boss. Now sadly, I wasn't able to test too many Ellen teams accurately since there wasn't any content or boss available in the CE server that catered to her. But I did test teams with Trigger and Astra Yao, which performed pretty decently even on a boss that didn't have ice weakness, so it's not too out there to expect Ellen plus Orphie teams to perform decently for ice weak content. But now here's a chart comparing the performance of every Orphie team I tried in Deadly Assault. Keep in mind, every S-rank agent is at M0 and every A-rank agent is at M6, and all of them had their signatures. Most of the teams were tested with the unknown complex boss, which had electric and ether weaknesses, while the fire teams were tested against the notorious Pom-Pom boss, which had a fire weakness, with both of the bosses having the respective buffs stated in the info cards in screen. But with that in mind, the scores you see here are due to many variables like my skill issue, so they are bound to change depending on your skill level, team builds, wenjins, and more. But it should still give a good idea on how much each team compared to each other. Now that's about it, which just leaves one last question. Is she a must pull? Well, as usual, it depends on your account. If you don't have either Seed or Anbi, Orphie isn't really a must pull. Like I mentioned, despite being a high damage sub DPS, other units do encounter buff uptime issues with her due to them not being able to trigger aftershocks. It's also worth noting that aside from Seed and Orphie, every other unit you can run with her has alternatives to Orphie that can provide higher uptime buffs that can help them deal more consistent damage. So in this case, it's much better to save or roll for characters you like or need. Remember, the rest of the 2.x characters are still coming. However, Orphie is a good pull if you have Seed or Anbi. She's able to improve their performance by quite a bit. She can generate Steel Charge for Seed to help increase the frequency of Seed's high damage mecha punches. And as for Anbi, she can help make up for the damage loss while you're building her Silver Star meter. But the neat thing is, she is not limited to Seed or Anbi teams. You can use them with other units like Evelyn or S11, given of course you take the steps to get around her buff uptime issues. Which of course makes her a pretty versatile unit with a lot of team options. It's also worth noting that her value as a unit can get much higher once we get more on-field aftershock units like Anbi who can fully take advantage of her benefits. At the end of the day though, if you like Orphie, pull for her, and if you don't, well don't. Personally, I'm definitely gonna be pulling for her because I'm a Seed main. Well, that, and look how adorable our goober captain is. But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub. Now, on to the showcases, and as usual, forgive my skill issue, I'm pretty terrible at this game due to my aging motor skills.